will see this and they say, Happy Chanukah. That's just a different spelling. They're transliterations from Hebrew, so that's how some people write it, and then some people write it the Happy Hanukkah the second way. It is the Feast of the Maccabees. And it's named after Judas Maccabeus, who we call Judah Maccabees, typically. And he led this big revolt against the Seleucid population, which were the Syrians, the Greek Syrians, that were coming against Judea, which is Israel. And we see it's also known as the Feast of Dedication, not the feast, I have to correct that. I was a terrible typist at school. I was so bad I had to audit the course just out of fear. And it's all about the dedication of the second temple that Solomon built, that David had dedicated. And we're going to look at Psalm 30. Marlene's going to read us that in a little bit. And that's going to be his dedication of the temple that he didn't get to build, but his son Solomon, or Shlomo in Hebrew, got to build. And then later on we see that the temple was desecrated, and so it had to be rededicated during this Maccabean revolt under Judah Maccabees. And it's also known as the Festival of Lights, because the lights that were in the temple, called the menorah, which represented the seven spirits of God, that had to be rededicated, but they only had enough oil that they found that had been consecrated for 1 day. And it took like a whole week to just consecrate the oil. And so it's not like they could just whip out some new olive oil and say, well, here I'll bring you some and you can use mine. No, they had to go through a whole process of consecrating that oil to make it holy and presentable to God. And so they used what they had, and they put the oil into that cruse, or the little cup, the little clay cup there, and that's what would last then for not only 7 days, but it would last for 8 days. God being a God of not enough, but a God of more than enough. Amen. So it's a tremendous holiday. God's showing his provision of the Jewish people, that the early Jewish people then would become the Christians. So the whole early Christian church was made up of Jewish people. A lot of people are surprised to know that Jesus was Jewish. I laugh and I think, wow, that's pretty amazing, but yeah, he was Jewish. And we are going to see him actually at the Feast of Dedication here. Yeah. There we go. Okay, so this is a little picture here of Judah the Maccabee. Maccabee translates to the hammer. He was known as the hammer. His dad was Mattathias, and he was the high priest of the temple. And he was the son then. There were 5 boys, and he was one of the children. And his father, in seeing that the temple had been desecrated, and that people were being killed for forcing them to slaughter a pig and to put that on the altar and to pray to Zeus, not to God. After seeing that people were actually being martyred when they refused to do that, he started a revolt. And then 1 year later he dies, and so now Judah the Maccabee ends up taking over his father's lead in this revolt. Judah was a guerrilla. That doesn't mean he was hairy. That means he fought in the hills along with his brothers and groups of people that he could organize. It was not an organized army. It was a band of brothers and many, many people that believed in what they believed to free up this temple and to free the people from the oppression of the Seleucids, or the Syrian Greeks. So, let's see here. That revolt takes place, as it says here, from 167 to 160. The numbers are going to get smaller as you approach the AD time frame. Remember, Christ was born in 4 BC, and so He was born 4 years before he was born. Time was dated backwards, so it's a whole long story. But anyway, that's kind of a little bit of a brief there. Alexander the Great. He was a great conqueror. And he basically conquered most of the known world. He was the son of Philip of Macedon, and basically every place he went to, he was successful in conquering. So the known world then was conquered basically by Alexander the Great, and he divided up into different kingdoms. And so the kingdom that included the area of Judea, or Israel, that would be under the Syrian Greek rule, and those people were called the Seleucids. So the Seleucids then, around 200 BC, were ruled by a man named Antiochus III. Antiochus III wasn't such a bad guy. He allowed people to do their own thing, to keep their customs. He allowed the Jews to worship still, as long as they paid tribute, of course. That was always of key importance. But as long as they were doing what the Greeks told them to do, the Greek Syrians, then everything was okay. They kind of laid low. But then he dies, and his son then takes his place. His son is Antiochus IV, and he gives himself the deified title of Epiphanes, which means God manifested. Okay? And so we know that Yeshua, when he came, he was Emmanuel. He was God with us truly. But this is a false God. I was kind of amazed when I was just kind of putzing around on the internet, and I saw a whole page of listings of people throughout different faiths and throughout world history that have also declared themselves to be gods. Yeshua was the only true one. But here's a false god in his own mind. The people actually called him not God manifested, but Antiochus the madman, because he was really, really crazed and very ruthless. And so he ascends the throne in 175 before Christ, or before the Common Era. So in the temple at the time was the high priest called Onias III. Onias III was a traditionalist. He was a person that kept the law, kept the Jewish traditions, kept the Jewish rituals, followed the law to the T, and he led the people in a very traditional Jewish way. However, the whole area was Hellenized, which means that you could maintain, well, prior to Antiochus the third, you could do your own thing, keep your religion. But now that it's Hellenized, under Antiochus the third, he's making people, they're making people to actually work Greek religion into Judaism. And little by little, they're overtaking the true belief and filling it with a lot of falsehoods. And so, Antiochus III throws the high priest Onias III out of his office of high priest. And he replaces him with another Jew that actually changed his name to make himself Greek, because Jason isn't really a Jewish name. And so he puts him in charge of the temple because he says, look, I can get a lot of money from you from the treasury. I can make sure that you are satisfied with the money I can get from these Jews. He was working against his own people, and he bought into a lot of this Hellenism stuff. Especially today, where a lot of people just assimilate with things that are happening in their culture. They think, well, everybody else is doing it, we'll just go along with it too. And so then Menelaus comes along, and Menelaus basically talks to Antiochus III and says, look, I can get you even more money from these Jews than from Jason. So Jason is ousted then, and Menelaus, another Greek name for a Jew, comes into power as the the high priest in the temple. And when Antiochus is fighting with a kingdom called the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt, he wants to overcome that, even though they're all now Hellenized, but he wants that kingdom, he wants to rule that kingdom too. He's not satisfied with his own. While he's in Egypt, Ptolemaic Egypt, a rumor started that Antiochus III was killed. And so Jason takes this opportunity then to raise up 1,000 people to come against Menelaus, to get him out of the temple, and to regain control then of the people in Jerusalem. Now, Antiochus, when he finds out about this, he's really enraged. He truly is mad at this point, and he comes back and wants to slaughter every Jew that he finds. Jews, women, children, taking refuge in their homes. He wants to slay them. He does slay them. About 40,000 of them are killed mercilessly in torturous deaths. And about the same number are enslaved. Very, very ruthless. And so you see why this Maccabean revolt was so important to try to save the Jewish people. The Jewish people were actually more or less in a civil war against themselves at the time too, because half of them were Hellenized now, and the other half were traditionalists that were keeping the faith. And so they're kind of fighting with themselves, and now you got the Seleucid army coming against him also. But thanks be to God, thanks be to Judah Maccabee and his brothers who organized people to have guerrilla warfare against the enemy that came against them. They had great victory, and they were able to drive them out. Now here we see in the book of John 10, 22 to 23, we see that Yeshua himself was celebrating the Feast of Dedication. Some people say, well, we don't really know he celebrated it. Well, I don't know why you would go all the way to Jerusalem to be at the Feast of Dedication without celebrating it. That doesn't make any sense, because every Jew celebrated it. So we see then came the festival of dedication to Jerusalem. It was winter, and Yeshua was in the temple courts walking in Solomon's colonnade. Now this is when people were jeering him and saying, "Are you really the Messiah? Are you really the Messiah?" And he says, "I've already told you, but you didn't understand, you didn't hear, you didn't want to hear." And he said, "My sheep know my voice, and they follow me. They know me. But you're not my sheep," basically, is what he's saying. And so he's saying, and then he says that I and the Father are one at this point. And so they really want to stone him then for blasphemy, because they tell him, "How can you declare yourself as God?" And then he reminds them about how God says in the Torah about how we are God's little gods of the earth. And so he uses the scripture then, and he escapes from that stoning then. But we see them at the same time, written about. We don't really find the story of Hanukkah in the Torah, because it happens after the Torah was actually written. We find it in the Talmud, the Jewish writings, and we also find it in the first and second book of Maccabees too. In there, they're talking about how they were using the 7 candles on the menorah to celebrate Sukkot, because they couldn't celebrate Sukkot, which is that 7-day festival that we celebrated not so long ago in the fall, the celebration of the ingathering, the harvest. And so they were celebrating that using the 7 days, but then God gave them enough light for 8 nights, 8 days.